Hello and welcome to today's Celsius talk. My name is Sarah Johnstone, and I will be moderating today's webinar, which will explore the issue of individual metering and billing for district heating. So it's an issue with particular policy relevance at the moment, as the European Commission's proposal for a revised Energy Efficiency Directive is being negotiated right now. The proposal includes new requirements for individual metering and billing of district heating, which is linked to goals of the overarching Clean Energy for All Europeans package, including energy efficiency targets as well as empowering consumers. Individual metering and billing is a controversial approach, however, which, while welcome for some, could imply a reversal of existing strategies for others. So during this online meeting, we will explore the issue from a range of policy perspectives with speakers from several EU member states. We will first hear from Birger Larsson, who will present a more general view of the topic, as well as talking about Denmark's lengthy experience with individual metering. We'll then move on to Lars Holmqvist from Göteborg Energy, who will present a Swedish perspective and discuss some of the alternatives. We will then hopefully hear from Henry Wynne in relation to the UK perspective. He's having a little bit of difficulty joining us, but hopefully he will make it. Otherwise, we will move straight on to Guillaume Perron, who will talk about the French debate around individual metering and billing. And then, time allowing, we will finish with a Q&A. So, let's move straight on to our first speaker. Birger Larsson holds a Master of Political Science from Copenhagen University, and he has worked for the Danish District Heating Association since graduating in 1994. Initially working as an economic advisor dealing with energy taxation, regulation, heat purchase contracts and more, and he soon added international affairs to his portfolio. He's been on the board of the European District Heating Association Euroheat and Power since 1998 and was chairman of its Energy Policy Committee between 2002 and 2010, and again from 2014 to 2016. He was also president of Euroheat and Power from 2010 to 2012 and is currently vice president, having held the position 2 times before. Privately, he lives in Kolding in western Denmark and is the same for 64% of Danes. He enjoys the benefits of district heating in his home. I'm sure we'd all be happy to say that that was the case. Birger, the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
We can indeed.
Good. Okay, thank you very much. And can I, my first slide here. Well, thank you very much for the...
You need to take over the presentation as well, sorry.
Oops.
Very good.
There we are. Okay. So, let's get started here. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you today. My first slide is sort of a bit on the general background. You could say, also referring to what you mentioned earlier, that with the you say new requirements in the Energy Efficiency Directive. I would say there has been also in the previous energy or the existing Energy Efficiency Directive, there are requirements regarding metering and billing, individual metering and billing. I would say that part of the reason that this is that these provisions are in there and sort of the general concept of metering and billing is that there also seems in Brussels to be a sort of a strong idea, a strong feeling that we have to empower the consumers to ensure that somebody is actually working to fulfill the energy and climate ambitions of the European Union. I would say it seems to some extent as if the member states of the European Union are reluctant to at the time at least, to work committedly towards achieving these goals. and that the Commission is desperately looking for someone to sort of take on the ambition and see what they can do to fulfill them. It's not a new debate. It has been, as I said, part of the debate in Brussels for a while, but it also seems to be sort of promoted by some sectors that see individual action as beneficial for their sectors, the building sector, providers of individual solutions, etc. And generally, you could say it's also part of the sort of ideological drive for individual action, individualism, which is part of you could say the modern world. Seen from the district heating sector perspective, we do not object or have anything against informing people about the consumption of energy, the composition of their energy supply and things like that. We do not object to that. We have some issues, however, with what the point of this exercise should be. Because one thing is informing, etc. Empowering people or consumers should be with the objective of ensuring that the right people have the right information at the right time to do the right thing. And we believe it's difficult for consumers, individual consumers in particular, to really make sure that what they do is a thing that will actually contribute towards the goals of with regard to climate and energy in the European Union. I will take myself as an example. If you look at this slide on the left hand side, at the bottom you can see a villa in Kolding. That's my villa in Kolding. Now I'm a district heating consumer. I'm connected to a local district heating distribution system, which again gets most of the heat, or all of its heat in practice, from that red heat transmission system illustrated in the map in the center. Now, into that heat transmission system is fed heat from a number of producers. On the left hand side, you have a waste incinerator in the town of Kolding. You have at the bottom right, you have a large-scale power plant. You have at the center on the right, you have a brewery, and at the top right, you have a refinery. Now, these four units are the main units for supplying heat into this transmission system. But if I look at my heat consumption and would say, okay, I look into this, what's the actually composition of it, I can be told that, but it will be difficult for me to use that information, say on an immediate basis, because most of the year the heat supply to the town of Kolding comes from the waste incinerator on the left hand side. But parts of the year it will come from some of the other sides, production sites in the system. So if I ask as for disclosure as is part of the requirements on district heating, and requirement to disclose the composition of heat supply to district heating, I can look at the website, currently look at the website of this heat transmission system, and I can see the composition of the fuel that is behind the district heating. I can see the amount of energy that goes into it, because part of it is surplus heat, so there is not really a fuel demand behind it. I can see the fuel efficiencies. I can establish or look at the primary energy factor. I can also see the emissions, and I can, if I get this information, and I can have it on there's part of it on my bill, but I can see this part of this information on my bill. What can I use that information for? If I'm not happy with the let's say the emissions of this, and I can say, okay, I want to do something else. I might install a heat pump or solar heating and things like that. That's all very fine. But what I get from disclosure is a historical back view. This is accounting that is going on, saying how has the heat that I have consumed, how has that been produced and with what emissions. That does not say anything about the future. So if I, on this historical information, decide to take action, I take action for the future. And in my case, that will mean if I say, okay, I switch to a heat pump, that would mean that I would be lost as a customer for this district heating system for the next at least 10, 20 years or something like that. And my action would totally ignore the fact that this district heating system has a contract with the large-scale power plant to convert that from currently gas to biomass to be used in the future. That is a large long-term contract with a total sum of about €1 billion or something like that. And that's a 20-year contract. Without that contract, that power plant would not have been converted. But I, based on my historical information, would have been acting and be lost as a customer for that system. That would depend on this, of these decisions in the system being dependent on my presence as a customer. So I would also ignore the fact that from 2017, because the plant is supposed to come on stream here shortly, the emissions, the CO2 emissions in my system will drop dramatically. My actions will completely ignore this fact. So, as I said, giving people information to empower them must be to ensure they do the right thing at the right time to help us achieve our ambitions. Now, there's one formulation I particularly like. It's a while ago, a couple of years ago, a Danish parliamentarian asked a member of European Parliament asked a question to the Commission about could it really be allowed that we had in some cases compulsory connection, district heating, things like that. And there was a response from the Commission to that question. It's not. The question of compulsory connection is not really relevant here, but the part of the formulation in the answer from the Commission I really like very much. It says that the Directive of Energy Efficiency promotes an integrated approach to assess the cost and benefits of the various efficient heating and cooling supply options. And then take good note of the following sentence. This approach takes into account all relevant supply resources in geographical boundaries, selected so as to avoid sub-optimized solutions on a project-by-project basis and covering socioeconomic and environmental factors when accounting for the economic effects. Now, this is the background for the Energy Efficiency Directive, and also the background for some of the provisions of the Directive 14 and 15 to ensure that when we develop our heating solutions in the European Union, we take account of the whole socioeconomic and environmental factors. And individual action rarely does that, because that is often a sub-optimized solutions on a project-by-project basis. So what we have tried to do, and what district heating to some extent is all about, is to cover socioeconomic and environmental factors when you do heating and to avoid sub-optimized solutions. Now, I don't say that all individual solutions are wrong. I'm just saying here, my point here is that it is extremely difficult for individual consumers, including myself, to really estimate what are the consequences of my individual actions. Do I really do the right thing to benefit of energy efficiency on the environment, or am I doing the wrong thing? So another issue of district heating and metering is who should be informed. The provisions in the directive, or the proposals for the directive, are a bit ambiguous when it comes to whether we are addressing customers or consumers. We have spent some time in the district heating sector trying to explain to the Commission and everybody else that the customer and the consumer in case of heating is not always the same person. If you look at myself as a district heating customer, I'm not only the customer because I have a contract with a local distributor of district heating, but I am also the consumer of district heating because it's consumed as heat and hot tap water in our villa. But in cases where you have multi-unit buildings, consumer and customer is not the same, because not necessarily the same, because if you have a multi-unit building, that building is typically the the customer for the district heating company. The building owner has a contract with the supplier to the building. Now, the building owner is probably also partially a consumer of energy, because there might be shared spaces in the building, the hallways, the basement, places like that might be heated, so some heat might be consumed there. But we also have individual consumers in each unit in the building. We have on the left-hand side, I try to draw up sort of the boundary, the commercial boundary of a district heating system. It typically, in most cases, ends where the district heating supply pipes enter the building with the main valves, and the metering goes on. On the left-hand side, you have the district heating system, where you may have an external heat producer, or production may take place in the district heating, or in the context of the district heating system operator, him or herself. But we have this commercial and system border. In Denmark, we have a tradition of metering individually in each and every unit. I thought that was rather incontroversial until I really started looking into the issue in this country. And it turns out that it's not so simple and uncontroversial as I thought it is, because we have, with our compulsory individual metering in individual flats, or sub-metering with heat cost allocators in individual units, we have created the split incentive between building owner and the resident individual units, where energy improvements of buildings, the building envelope cost of that will befall on the building owner, and the benefits in terms of reduced consumption will befall on the consumer. So here we have a split incentive example in district heating in Denmark. I think I've spent my time, and I think I will stop there. That was also my last slide. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Birger. Now presentation has just disappeared for me. There we are getting it back. Very good. Very good. Okay. Thank you very much, Birger. Before we move on to our next speaker, I'd just like to ask the audience if you have any questions for Birger about either the Danish experience or this more policy generalized perspective. I will remind you that there will also be a chance at the end of the webinar to ask questions to all speakers. So if you don't have any straight away, you will have a chance to ask him again later. Birger, I just thought I would ask you, you said that you didn't think that that this was necessarily very controversial, the situation that you have in Denmark, before you started getting involved. And obviously you're a person with a lot of knowledge and expertise and interest in the district heating field. But do you know how it's sort of perceived in the rest of Denmark? Is this something that people think is a good idea and useful? Or are there other critical voices of individual metering? Birger, can you hear me? What do you think?
Sorry, my mic had been switched off.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. No, there's no debate really. You don't read anything about it, and that was the reason I also thought it was not controversial. It's not controversial because I mean, with regard to district heating, we have a lot of individual houses like my own connected to district heating. Obviously, not a problem there. In multi-unit buildings, it's also the norm to have either direct metering, but that's not common, but the very common is sub-metering in the form of heat cost allocation going on in buildings. Quite uncontroversial, I thought. Everybody seems to think, this is a fair system, and so. The controversy is not so much with the individuals paying and things like that, but it seems that building owners, I've heard from some building associations that they have problems with people turning their heat off to save cost, which creates indoor climate problems, mildew in apartments, things like that, increases the heating costs for the nearby residents in the same building and things like that. This is not something you read in the press or see anything about, but so you can say it's not such a big problem that it's been raised publicly. But on the other hand, we have the issue, and then so it's not. My impression is that compulsory individual metering or sub-metering in multi-unit buildings is not entirely popular with buildings owners. I'm not sure about tenants, residents in these. I think most people will probably see this as a kind of, a fairness system rather than anything used for achieving energy efficiency, things like that, but more a fair way of distributing costs.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that answer. And you've certainly raised a lot of issues that I'm hoping we're going to get a chance to get into a little bit more. But for the meantime, I think we'll head straight over to our next speaker, which is Lars Holmqvist from Göteborg Energy. Lars holds a Master of Science in Chemical Engineering, and he's been working at Gothenburg Energy for about 18 years, mainly working with environmental issues and policy. His particular area of interest is taking a holistic perspective of the energy system and how that translates into specific regulations concerning building codes, waste to energy, energy efficiency, and metering and billing. So with a lot of experience, Lars, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. My presentation will be, I dare to say, fairly blunt, because we've had this discussion on individual metering in Sweden a couple of times and also quite recently, and I would say that there's a majority, if not consensus, in the Swedish debate that this is really a bad idea. Usually I've only used two arguments. One, it's counterproductive, and two, it's inexpensive and inefficient. But since I took a course in rhetorics lately, I was told to have three arguments, so I came up with another one, and also a fourth one while I was studying these slides just a couple of minutes ago, so we'll see how that goes. But first, some definitions. I think it's very important that we agree on what we are talking about. So now I'm talking about individual metering and billing, not providing information for the customer, as Birger was talking about. This is another issue. We're talking about metering and billing. And it's also very important to realize the difference between the customer, which in my world is someone who is paying the bill for something, and the end consumer is the person who actually using or enjoying a product. And also that we're talking about space heating. District heating is typically also providing a flat with hot water, and then there's a slightly different perspective to that, since the counterproductive argument is not really valid there. I'll come back to that perhaps. And just to describe how we live in flats in Sweden, I'm not talking about villas because that's a minor share of the district heating market, whereas in the flat market we have a very high percentage of district heating. It's divided. We have a high share of rental flats, which are similar to the rest of the world. We have a landlord that owns a building that the tenants are renting. In Sweden, we have quite a high share of public ownership of of flats, which is not the same as social housing, but we have public ownerships. We also have private owners. And normally heating and hot water is included in the rent, but not electricity. So you get an electricity bill for beside your rent, but not a heating bill. And this means that in this case, the customer of district heating is not the same as the end consumer. But a quite large share, maybe up to 50% in some of the larger cities, is not a rental flats. And it's not ownership flats as well, which I think is more common in many member states, where you actually own your own apartment and you have to buy individually everything that goes into it. But the ownership is more like a cooperative, but you own not your own flat, but you own a share in a cooperative that together owns a building or a block of building. And this means that all decisions concerning heating, maintenance, who's going to wipe the stairs, small and little things, is up to the cooperative, which is run by a board chosen by the members of the cooperative. And in this case, I would argue that the customer is actually the same as the end consumer, so we don't have the split incentive there. In both cases, district heating is the dominant heating source, but not the only one. So in this debate, I think there are some fundamental differences that we have to discuss and be aware of. In the terms of rental flats, you have to be aware of the relation between the landlord and the tenants, and be aware of where you place what incentives, and also where you place incentive between the tenants, because that could also be interesting. And I would say that from this perspective, it might be interesting to see if legislation could work as a tool for achieving consumer power here, whereas if in the cooperatives, we don't have a conflict between the landlord and the tenants because it's the same. They are the same. So there, in a cooperative, I see no reason whatsoever for the government to interfere with the dealings of a cooperative. So from now on, I think the debate should be about rental flats only. So my first argument, and I think is the most important one, is that individual meeting and billing would be counterproductive. Just as Birger was saying, that you create a split incentive. If the landlord, or not the tenants, who controls energy consumption on the important things, the standard of a heating system, the insulation, and all these things, whereas the tenant can do very little about it if he or she is not to freeze, actually. So with individual metering and billing, the landlord gets less incentive to increase energy efficiency, so it's directly counterproductive, I would say. And also, then most of the discussions, both in Sweden and it seems like in Brussels now, is focusing on cost efficiency, and that's another argument, because there's not really that much of a potential if you don't want to be freezing. Maybe you could lower your indoor temperature a couple of degrees, and that would save you a few hundred kilowatt hours of district heating annually, or with Swedish prices, a couple of tens of euros, whereas a metering device would cost a few hundred euros. And that does not include maintenance, data management, and billing. So there's apart from the large fixed cost of the investment cost, I think the running cost would be similar to the savings potential. And beside that, we have had various tests where we have introduced individual metering and billing in different houses over the years, and we have never really seen any lowering of consumptions. In as many cases as not, the consumption has gone up because people have realized that district heating is so cheap. So people have raised the temperature rather than the opposite. And you also have the fairness issue where heat necessarily leaks between flats, so you might create difficulties being fair between different tenants as well. Now the third argument, which is based on the assumption that there's, like also Birger was saying, that there seems to be some kind of moral issue that you should pay for what you use. And even with individual metering and billing, I don't think that would be the case. This, as you see now, is a graph of how district heating is produced in Gothenburg. Different plants in different colors coming in at different times of the year, and with vastly different production cost and vastly different emissions and resource consumption. Basically, it's waste heat and waste incineration in the bottom, and you got fossil fuel on the blue and black, which you can hardly see graph on top. And in the next slide you see how the business-to-business pricing model is created in Sweden. We have quite a complicated price model. There's a fixed component based on your power consumption, the gray bars on the bottom, and there are 3 different energy price levels depending on what seasons you have. You have the winter price, a spring autumn price, and a summer price, which varies greatly, and you also has a price component which relates to your return temperature, indicating how efficient your own district heating system is working locally. And this is working fine, but I can't see how a business model like that could be introduced for end consumers. With the villas that we are providing district heating to, we only have a flat per kilowatt energy fee, so we miss all these subtleties trying to give the landlord the right incentives to save the right kind of heat at the right time. But billing the end user would necessarily mean a less sophisticated pricing model, I would say. So we would miss the opportunities of using pricing as a way of saving primary energy and emission. And you would also introduce less consumer power, I would say, that rather than more, because the end consumer living in a flat is a much weaker part on the market than the landlord is. And that's my fourth argument that I came up with right now, and I don't have any slides for, is that the driver for the district heating market is the power relation between the consumer, which can leave the district heating system, and the producer, which tries to meet the demands of the customer. But I can't really see how an end consumer living on the 14th floor of a building can leave a district heating system. So I think billing the end user would actually meaning that the customer side is losing its ultimate weapon of leaving the system. But you might ask, is this only relevant for Sweden? And I don't think so. The tenant versus landlord relationship is essentially the same all over the place. But I think the Swedish model of the cooperative ownership rather than owning a flat puts up some possibilities of direct ownership of your living, but still maintaining this collective metering thing. So I would say that rather than defending or defending our way of life or way of having a district heating system in Sweden, I think we should advocate it as to make it more of a standard in the European context, to use metering on the building level rather than individual level, because it gives us several advantages. It places the incentives better among the market players. And we have solved the problem of energy poverty. We have not solved the problem of poverty, of course, but if you have a flat in Sweden, you don't have to freeze. That's always something. And you get a better market power balance between supplier and customer. And you have possibility to have better pricing models. You get less administration, which the customer would eventually pay for in all cases anyway, and I think it will be more cost efficient. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lars, for that. And I see we have a couple of questions coming in already. Just to let you, our other listeners, know that Lars will have to leave us very shortly, unfortunately, for another important engagement. So if you do have a question you'd like to ask him, I encourage you to try and formulate it quickly and enter it into the chat. But we have a question now from Marko Kosic from Coheat in the UK. And referring to, you presented Gothenburg Energy's business-to-business pricing model and said that individual metering would mean it would have to be less sophisticated. And Marco is wondering if that's for technical reasons or for commercial reasons to do with user engagement.
Yeah, I would rather call it commercial reasons, but it comes down to what kind of signal can the customer actually understand and react towards. I don't think you could solve all this by introducing smart schemes to much of an extent. So it's more the problem of presenting the consumer with an absolutely crowded bill of things that the customer has no real chance of understanding. We get complaints sometimes from professional customers complaining about the complicated bill, but there we have at least a chance to discuss this. But I can't see this happening for the smaller, for an end consumer in a flat. No.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And Marco also sends his thanks. I've got a question for you as well, Lars. So you sort of, I think, made very convincing arguments for why individual metering doesn't really answer many of the aims that the European Commission seems to be after in terms of fairness, that you pay what you want, or in terms of empowered consumers or energy efficiency or incentives or even cost efficiency. So my question for you really is, what would we like to be seeing from Brussels instead? If we accept that all of these are good aims, empowered consumers, fairness, energy efficiency, cost efficiency, what could we be doing instead? You mentioned the sort of Swedish way of doing things. Is there something that will work somewhere else? What would you like to see from Brussels?
I think it would be interesting to try to create a debate on from a more proactive point of view, from my point of view at least, promoting metering on building level as a better, not only easier to achieve, but a better way of billing if we want to achieve all these aims. Because now from what I've heard of the debate now, when it's come up in the directive, is quite defensive arguments, mostly related to cost. The counterproductive argument is there also, at least from the Swedish government point of view. But I think it would be interesting if you could actually make a proposition of how we could go from. I presume that many member states have individual metering, like Denmark, in a flat where you own your flat and have very little to do with your neighbors. But to create this more of a corporate thing to solve the day-to-day issues of living in the same building.
Yes, thank you for that. I see that there are a couple of other people trying to enter some questions, so we'll just give them a couple of seconds to finish up their questions. I think we've talked a little bit about sort of issues of fairness and consumer empowerment. And I'm also wondering really how we look at what we mean by consumer empowerment. And I think there, both you and Birgir have kind of talked about a difference between consumers and end users and who exactly it is that we are trying to empower. So are there different ways of looking at what we mean by consumer empowerment and who we're trying to empower. Do you think it's possible for a piece of legislation like the Energy Efficiency Directive to actually empower all sorts of consumers, or should they be focusing on certain consumers over others?
Yes, obviously we have different concepts of consumer and consumer. Who's the consumer and what is consumer power? For me, individual meeting would mean less consumer power, because as it is now, the landlord is a powerful player in the market in a way that the end consumer never will be. But how to put that in a directive, I'm not really sure.
Good.
Perhaps something like anything we do considering regulating metering should be done with having all these factors in mind, that it should actually lead to incentives for energy efficiency, etc., etc.
All right,
Long questions here.
We're having a very lively debate in the comments, and we will try and come back to some of these as well, so that Birgit can have a chance to answer them, and also we're very keen to hear Guillaume's presentation as well. So, but just seeing as you are going to leave us very soon, Lars, I'll let you have a say about some of the questions that are coming in, and then we will move on to our final speaker.
I could just comment, if it's okay, on the last question of creating a spot price model for district heating. I think it ties into this discussion, because we have such a model on a business-to-business level. So we actually have got a customer paying for district heating in this manner, and also the cost that we pay to our producers, because we buy a lot of our heat from waste heat suppliers, is based on a spot market. But I think it's very difficult to find the end consumer, the tenant, getting into this to this market in a efficient way, especially not cost effective.
So that's just in case there's any listeners that haven't been able to follow the chat here. That was in response to a comment asking about in spot price models for district heating, similar to the Nord Pool markets, where cooperative owners are billed per hour, and where peak hours, for example, in the morning, generate a higher price, which creates incentives for peak shaving and load shifting, rather than simply trying to reduce energy consumption. So that was a very interesting contribution here. And Marco is also sort of asking about a restricted service level or agreed service level that a consumer must override if your standard tariff has an agreed return temperature limit or flow limit. If your consumer side system is badly set up, the substation will limit the return temperature or flow limit unless the consumer presses an override button and agrees to a higher tariff. All right. So, Lars, if you have a comment about that.
Not directly. Just a question, technical question. Is it possible to come back to this discussion later on after this meeting? It seems like some interesting things are coming up, which I really don't have time to address. But is it possible just to enter the Skype meeting and start chatting away?
No, I tell you what we will have at the end, and we will certainly try and get some of these fantastic comments over there. We have actually a LinkedIn group that you will receive, that all listeners and participants will receive a link to at the end of the webinar. So I think I'll thank everybody for the contribution so far, and you're welcome to keep up the flow of comments and questions after the webinar on our LinkedIn group, and you will receive a link. So I think we will, just to make sure that everybody does get a chance to have their presentation and hear from all of the speakers, we will move on to our final speaker, Guillaume. So we'll thank you very much, Lars, and good luck on your next meeting.
Great, thank you.
Great. So unfortunately, our UK speaker was unable to join us today due to technical difficulties. So we do have our last presenter now on the French perspective. So welcome to you, Guillaume. Guillaume Perron is in charge of the Department for District Heating at FNCCR, the Federation of Local Authorities and Regions in France, gathering more than 800 members and 60 million inhabitants, which is spread throughout France and even internationally. The Federation is active in energy issues, including gas, electricity, and district heating and cooling networks, as well as in areas such as water district networks, sewage systems, and digital networks. Guillaume himself is an energy engineer and has previously worked at ADAM, the French National Environmental Agency, in the field of renewable heat and district heating. So without any further ado, I will pass the floor over to you, Guillaume.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
We can. So don't forget to take over as a presenter.
Okay. Okay, there I am. Perfect. Thank you very much for this organized exchange about this subject to the Celsius team. It's a trendy subject, kind of in France, because we have a long action for at least 2 years about this subject. Just a few words about FNCCR. As you told us, we are gathering all the municipality and local authority in this three field: energy, water, sanitation network, digital network. We are on the part of public services, public authorities. About the French context and precisely on the subject today. Previously, we've had several laws during the 70s due to the oil shock, which aims to reduce the consumption and using all levels that are available to reduce the energy consumption. So there were several laws taken with this subject, but no one was really efficient to act this kind of measure. Recently, we've had the Loi de Transition Énergétique, which is the French statute, big French statute about making an energy transition, especially on renewable energy and heating, district heating. Well, this law was very interesting for district heating because it has a very good objective to develop district heating. And there was also a special discussion on individual metering and billing. Before to enact the decree, there were strong debates between all the stakeholders to put what we have to write into the regulation to promulgate this law and the level of individual metering and billing. There was an obligation and a fine if you don't follow this kind of law. Which were the argument in favor of this measure? There were some good points leading to this idea. The central observation is that heating and cooling systems are around 40% of the energy consumption and has to decrease. So how to decrease it? We can put this kind of measure, individual metering and billing, so the inhabitants will have awareness of their consumption, can pay only for their own and real consumption, so there will need some effort from them to reduce the power requirements, the use of energy, acting on the way of living to have energy, of course, for them money saving. Another argument which was really interesting is that the precise part of district heating will appear clearly in the bill and not be included in the rates such as lifts or all the routine household maintenance that are included in the bill. So there was a good point about that. But on the other way, there was a lot of bad arguments arguments in favor of this measure. First is, and it could be the killer argument about cost. Lars has told us a little bit about that. When you are adding installation costs, the servicing, meter readings, invoice, you have a cost that is bigger than the energy savings and money savings thanks to this measure. We have made some measure. Before this measure, we have estimated that it could be, the energy saving could be between 0 and 20%. After this measure, the real consumption on the real efficiency is about a reduction of 0, just equal costs, or maybe a reduction of 5%, which is not a real great level about that. And it's even more true for new buildings on when you are adding all these individual costs. The cause of question, the cause of problem was also about social equity. I'm speaking, of course, in multi-units buildings. Because we have noticed that the question of energy consumption is not only linked to the way you live. It's not you just have to, you can't just say here is your consumption. You just have to make a different way of life to reduce your energy billing and to save money. It's also linked, of course, to the situation of the flat and the thermal insulation, such as when you're north facing, you have to eat more in your individual apartment. When you're in the rooftop or ground floor or in the middle, it's not the same consumption of energy. I put on the right of this slide a diagram making a simulation about which consumption are linked to the situation of the flat in the multi-units building. And we have not also a correlation that especially the ground floor are the cheapest place to have low-income tenants. So when you will separate the heating bills, they will have to pay more for the billing, and that will contribute to enlarge the gap between low-income tenants and privileged one. Another phenomenon that we have noticed is about I don't have the English term for that. In France, we're speaking about voleur de calories, thief of eating, which means when you choose or don't choose to turn it down for economical or environmental reason, all the walls around get more colder, so all the neighbors should have to heat more their flats and use other bills that is higher because of the neighbor either chose or didn't choose to stop the heat down. And other argument was about it's dangerous measure that can, as it was presented in France, I mean, can give the impression that individual metering will solve all the problem of energy efficiency. So giving the impression that when the tenant, the owner, puts a way of measuring individual consumption, he has done everything to ensure a best efficient in terms of energy and make the best of you can do about energy efficiency. So it's dangerous giving this expression because there's a lot of other way of acting, of course, thermal insulation on the building, but also a better regulation, desludging, etc., to ensure efficiency that cost maybe less than this kind of measure. How in the different stakeholders, there was in two, the major party of the stakeholder was opponent to this measure. I mean, all the actors or value chain were not in favor of this measure, such as the local authorities, also National Association of Co-Owners in Multi-Units Buildings, Consumer Association, and of course also the National Union for Housing, Social Housing, which has also to imply this measure. The Environment Agency was kind of neutral in this kind of debate, maybe in the middle, little bit on the left because of the efficiency measure weren't guarantee and not on the same level that it was promised. And there was only one supporter of this measure, a staunch advocate about that, which is the National Measurement Association, maybe because it's linked to a business question, I'm not sure. So what happened? Despite of this position of all stakeholders, the government decided to promulgate this measure. But it was written on a certain way, giving up some exception on this decree. The decree says that all the individual measuring and individual billing is mandatory, but there is two exceptions. When it's technically impossible to measure the individual consumption with special system of units heating, and when it gives too much cost, excessive cost, really higher than the impact of energy savings. You should not install this new measure. So, and there was also another way of developing this measure, which is in making 3 steps, 3 stages of developing this measure, saying that on each year you open this measure to coming from the building the most consuming buildings, and then to the less consuming building. So all this measure decrease the impact actually of this decree. My conclusion is that we have to make clearly not a confusion between individual measurement on individual parts, which could be a great idea for machine control to reduce the difference of temperature on the substation, have a positive impact on the substation and in terms of prevision of consumption, and but we don't have to link this question of individual billings because of all the arguments I put before. So in conclusion, I say that there is more cons, more elements in favor of this measure than pro. As you have see, there was very few people in favor of this measure. And quite linked to business question, of course. And with high cost, it's not very linked to the benefits that we can have on the energy savings measure and billing. So it was not a real good idea. And as you can hear, it's a euphemism about on this measure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Guillaume. Does anybody in the audience have an immediate question for Guillaume before we move on to a general Q&A? Feel free to enter that into the box. But I'd also like to thank you, Guillaume, for it's very interesting to hear about the actual debate that was going on in France, as we've heard that Denmark has some experience of this, but there wasn't so much of a debate around it. And I'd like to ask you kind of some of the similar questions I've been asking to some of the other speakers we've had as well. Is I mean, in terms of empowered consumers, in terms of fairness for consumers, you took also quite a critical view. Do you think that the reasons that this is being criticized in France, are they sort of in line with some of the other situations we've been hearing about in the other countries, or are they particular issues for France?
No, I think it's the same problems in every country, because the multi-unit buildings are owned on the same way. So there is a same argument. The ground floor is always in a lot of countries I can know used with low incomes people. I mean lower than higher stages floors on the same buildings.
It's very good to know. You often end up, when you're talking about EU legislation, you often end up in a situation where everyone thinks that their own context is particularly special, but it's also fascinating to hear that there are these similarities. even in countries that we might think are otherwise quite different. So we have a question from Marco, again from Coheat. He's asking, does the French government pay the heating bills for those in government-supported housing? Or does the government pay the resident and the resident must pay the heating bills to the housing provider? He's contrasting it with the UK. In the UK, the government pays the resident money, and then they themselves must pay their housing provider. Some housing is government provided, whereas some is provided by charities, and some housing is private. What's the situation like in France? Where does the money go?
The government gives helps to the residents, but it's special helps that can only be used to pay the heating bills. So I guess it's the same way that in the UK, if I don't make a mistake, if I well understand the question.
Okay, yes, no, it does sound similar. And it looks like Marco has a further comment or question for that. But I think right now, seeing as time is moving on, yes, we will open it up to our remaining speakers. So we have left with us Birger and Guillaume. So as you may have heard, we've had a lengthy discussion in the comments. And Marco just responded. Actually, in the UK, the tenants get cash, which they can then spend on whatever. So I guess that makes the question of choosing between heating and eating or other or other things you might want to spend your money on a bit more acute. But we've had a sort of lively discussion in the chat function. I'll ask you to try and hold it out loud now instead. So Guillaume, I see you have a response ready. Maybe you can deliver it orally instead.
On the chat, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's not exactly the same that in the UK. That's what we were speaking on the chat, because of course in the UK they get cash, but in France it's a special heating check that can only be used for heating bills.
Okay. Very interesting. And Birger, you've also had a little bit of a sort of discussion in the chat function here. Could you give us a summary of some of the things you've been talking about, some of the questions that have come up?
Well, I think it was just a comment on sort of the way you produce your tariffs. And information, you could say. I think there was a question of sort of, could you have hourly rates and things like that? Yes and no. We have a large heat transmission company that is operating with hourly prices towards the distributors to sort of optimize the what you call it, the merit order of production units. So in that case, it makes good sense. Hourly rates for individual consumers in my own case, and that was what I described or tried to describe in the chat. The heat for my home can be hours in transit between the power plant or the waste incinerator and my home, and I have no knowledge of when my 18-year-old daughter turns on the shower at home, where does the heat come from and when was it produced? We don't know, because the flow and the production units varies a lot. So it would be difficult, to sort of, as it's not as with electricity, you could say you have an immediate sort of response in the system or choice or between production units in the electricity system. You don't have that in the heat system. There's a lot of inertia in the system, meaning, when I turn on the heat in the morning, or my daughter takes a shower, that heat can be produced 10, 12 hours before. So there's no direct connection between sort of the possibility of an hourly production, hourly rate and the production behind it. It would be very difficult to produce.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. We've heard, I think it's fair to say we've heard quite a few sort of negative responses to the idea of individual metering and billing. And I'd like to ask the two of you then, Birgit and Guillaume, the same question I asked Lars. If considering that the goals of the clean energy package were sort of fairness for consumers, empowered consumers, while also achieving energy efficiency and cost efficiency, what alternative steps would we like to see from Brussels instead of continuing to push this individual metering and billing perspective?
I would say, seen from the district heating perspective, or the perspective of a district heating supplier, what goes on inside the building is I mean, it's not our responsibility. That was also partly what I showed with my last slide, that whether a building has sub-metering or not is not really a concern or a responsibility for the district heating provider in our view. We have currently, and I think all district heating systems have that all over Europe, that when you deliver heat for a building, you have a meter there. And as far as we're concerned, that is probably enough for the purpose of district heating and for the optimization system and accounting and things like that. Providing information, fine. What if the issue of fairness going on in building or allocation between individual tenants or residents in the building is, in my perspective, not really a district heating discussion. That is a building discussion. And if we, with just providing information metering to the building owner, can incentivize higher efficiency in the building, improvement of building and things like that, fair enough, that's enough. I cannot really see a district heating need for individual metering inside the building, or sub-metering or allocation metering, things like that. I see no use for that.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that answer. Yes, Guillaume, what would do you have any ideas about what we could see from Brussels?
I think the kind of confusion is this measure saying that it could act on energy efficiency, or this kind of measure can only act on the way of living, and it can't solve problem of energy efficiency. So it would be better to upon special on obligation of making energy action of efficiency. I mean, in terms of insulation, in terms of making a big package of all measure of energy saving, better than one individual measure that is not in the field of energy efficiency, but in the field of way of living. So don't make a confusion between these two notions, and promote a package of energy saving measure and not only one.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that does kind of lead me to my next question. Birgit, I really liked what you said about how metering is kind of accounting backwards, and instead we need to plan forwards. And I think that ties in, Guillaume, to what you just said, that it's not a very appropriate measure really, or incentive for achieving energy efficiency. So how can we shift from simply accounting backwards? Do you have any spontaneous ideas for what alternatives we can have to individual metering to inspire consumers to plan forwards?
Well, if Brussels wants to do something, maybe we should start working on the illusion that the individual is responsible and should, is the approach, or should be our approach towards what is basically the most collective of all challenges. I mean, the climate challenge is a very collective issue, and here it seems policy-wise as if we want to individualize the problem and put people under the illusion that if you just act, we can solve this. when in reality things are so complex that the individual will never have a chance to see really what they do, the consequences of individual action is, and they will probably tend to focus on what's my individual benefit, regardless of the shared or the collective consequences of this. This is the reason we have the energy crisis and things like that. Externalities are not included anywhere. This is not including externalities. This is putting people under the illusion that buy a heat pump and you save the world, which is nonsense. And I think the sort of a more communal approach from bosses, placing the responsibility on member states and communities and saying, look, if you want to really address these issues, you got to do something systematically, collectively about them. This is a collective problem, solve it collectively.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a really important perspective. How do you feel, Guillaume? Is this similar to your line of thinking as well, or?
I'm sorry, it's just crashed. Please repeat.
Sorry. Yes, my question was, how can, if we accept that individual metering is sort of accounting backwards, how can we more broadly inspire consumers to plan forward to achieve these goals of energy efficiency?
I guess big effort can be made on the how can I say this? The transmitter of it that can be changed. A lot of things can be done on this kind of transmitter, I guess. There is more efficient energy savings measure that can be done through this level better than on the other way we previously spoke about.
Fantastic, thank you. I think we need to start rounding off, as I know Birger at least needs to leave us at 12. So I'd really like to thank everybody for their fantastic contributions, and I'd like to thank our participants as well for all of their great ideas and very active comments. So I think we will say thank you very much for attending today, and we welcome you back again.